Welcome, travelers, to my realm of nightmares. Allow me to be your personal assistant. Come in, take a seat, get comfortable. For when you step into my realm, there's no stepping out.
I'm writing this because I still don't know what in the world happened to me and my husband, so I was hoping to get someone's opinion. My name is Michelle, and my husband, Justin, and I love to travel. Whenever we get the chance, we'll pack up our van and head out to go hiking and camping. We love being in nature. There's just something about being outdoors. It's just so relaxing, and I have a hobby of taking pictures of the scenery. Well, a couple of months ago, Justin had suggested we rent out a cabin before our schedules get any more hectic. So a few weeks of planning and rescheduling, we were prepared to head deep into the woods for a relaxing vacation. The cabin was in an area we weren't too familiar with, but the reviews were great and the price was even more amazing. It took a few hours and we finally made it. I was thrilled to see that it looked as awesome as the pictures on the site made it out to be. It was something like you will see in a Hallmark movie. A rustic looking log cabin with a stone chimney on the side. After taking a moment to unpack, my husband crashed onto the couch to take a little nap. The sun was getting closer to setting, and I wanted to take a couple photos outside to pass the time until dinner. I grabbed my digital camera as I stepped outside. I was excited to take a few pictures of this beautiful scenery before it got too dark. Walking around, the sounds of leaves crunching underneath my feet filled my ears. I settled myself at a good spot behind our cabin to take a few shots of the trees. The shutter of my camera filled the space around me as I aimed towards the forest. That was when I noticed the trees rustling on my camera screen. Whatever it was a few yards away from me. I took my camera and zoomed into its direction. It was getting dark, so I turned my flash and snapped a photo. I looked back onto my screen to see bright white eyes glaring at me from the woods. I'm sure it was probably a deer or something, but whatever it was kind of freaked me out to just see eyes in the shadows. I nearly jumped out of my skin when I heard my husband call out to me. I turned to see him laughing at me from an open window. I cursed at him a bit before returning inside. We wrapped up the rest of our evening over dinner and a couple glasses of wine as I showed him the picture I took earlier. He stopped at the picture of the glowing eyes I'd taken. He was sure that it was a deer. He had packed our bows and arrows and suggested that we go hunting a bit tomorrow afternoon, to which I agreed. So, after planning out what to do the next day, we decided to turn in for the night to start an early morning. It sounded like very careful footsteps, pacing back and forth. Thump. 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 I made some attempt to wake Justin, but I couldn't break his deep sleep. I told myself that it was probably just some animal and tried to ignore it. I really tried to. But I lied there, staring at the ceiling, just listening to whatever it was step around outside. This had gone on for at least an hour or so, just a repetitive stepping. Thump. 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 That's when I decided enough was enough, so I took my elbows and jabbed at Justin's ribs. I pressed my hand over his mouth before he started yelling at me and told him to hush. He looked at me, confused, and I whispered to him that I heard something walking outside. We both sat there with our breaths held to listen around us. It was completely silent until the steps emerged again. This time they were faster and moving away from us. Thump, 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 thump. Justin usually keeps a gun on him, just in case, and he grabbed it. As he looked out the bedroom window, it was completely dark outside, so unfortunately, he wasn't able to see anything. He looked at me and said that I was as white as a sheet. He lied beside me and tried to comfort me. He asked if I wanted him to go outside to check, to which I gave him a loud, "Hell no!" Only a few short hours later, the sun rose above us. I was barely able to get any sleep, so I rushed towards the kitchen to make some coffee. We were supposed to get up early to get a hike in, but I was just exhausted. I told Justin we'd go hiking another time, and that I wanted to try to get a bit of work done from here. Usually, we wouldn't bring work into our vacations, but I needed something to take my mind off things. He was a little reluctant to leave me alone, but Justin asked if it was okay for him to go hunting. He was extremely capable, so I was sure that he'd be okay. I just made sure that he brought his gun and phone with him. He got ready and gave me a kiss, assuring me that he'd be back in a few hours. So he left, and I kept myself preoccupied for a while, finishing up some work and taking a few pictures in broad daylight. It was early afternoon when I decided to take a small nap before Justin got back. I must have been more tired than I thought I was when I was suddenly jolted awake. I slowly got up off the couch, shaking off the feeling of grogginess. I looked at my phone to check the time to see it was around 5 p.m. I called it to Justin, thinking he must have been back already, but there was no response. I thought he must surely be back already. Usually when he says a couple hours, he means it. I looked outside to see just a bit of sunlight dimming out. Took up my phone to call Justin. Maybe he just lost track of time. As my line continued to ring, my heart began to sink as I thought of him being hurt in the woods. I quickly shook the images out of my head. I got a hold of a flashlight that we had packed and stepped outside. Called his name again. My yell echoed around me. Help! I heard a yell call out to me. It was Justin, but it didn't sound right to me. Help! Me! I was a bit reluctant, but I called his name back to him. There was something about his voice. It sounded a bit deeper, but a bit distorted. Help! Again, it sounded distorted, but I pushed those feelings away. He was calling out for help, so my first thought was to go to him. Maybe he was hurt, and that's why he didn't sound right. I turned on the flashlight and ran to the direction where I heard him. I began to call his name again, following his voice as it traversed deeper into the dark woods. I used the beam from my flashlight to show what's in front of me. That was when I saw a figure standing in the middle of a clearing. It was Justin, stepping towards me slowly with some arrows and his bow over his shoulder. He asked me what was wrong. I told him that I heard him calling out for help, but he just gave me another look of confusion. He was on the trail of some deer, but suddenly heard me calling out his name. Not only did I scare away the deer, he swore up and down that it wasn't him that was calling out for help. He pulled out his phone to show me that his phone had died, and that of course he just lost track of time. We were a bit of ways from the cabin, so I followed Justin. He seemed to know where he was going. As we were making our way back, he stopped dead in his tracks. I almost bumped into him. I tried to ask what was wrong until he gave me a quiet shh sound. I could hear the sound, a very light thumping of hooves. I followed the direction of his gaze to see a deer in the distance. Justin slowly readied his bow. I kept completely quiet as to not break his focus. We stood there in silence until I heard the arrow thwop away from us. I heard the groan of the deer, and Justin let out a hushed yes. We jogged over to check out his kill. Justin was excited to eat some good venison for dinner. But before we made it to the deer, something leapt down onto it. It made a loud boom as it landed onto the forest floor. The darkness of the night was slowly surrounding us, and I flashed my light at it to make out a few of its features. Whatever this thing was, it was huge. It must have been at least 6 to 7 feet tall, and it was pure pale white. Its arms and legs were so fucking long. It was as if the limbs had 2 or 3 extra joints in them. It was on all fours, and it stretched one long arm and snatched a deer with it. It turned to look at us, and its face, it had small glowing white eyeballs in its sockets, and its mouth was agape to show its sharp, dog-like teeth. Justin didn't hesitate and turned towards me, yelling at me to fucking run. So that's what I did. I turned tail and ran with all of my strength. My footsteps and heavy breathing filled my ears as my legs started to ache, but I was too afraid and couldn't stop. That was when I realized my footsteps, my breaths, were the only ones I could hear. I turned around to see that my husband was not behind me. I almost tripped over myself as I quickly stopped to survey my surroundings. The flashlight wasn't the greatest, so I shone it in each direction. There were no distinguishable features in the trees around me, and that was when I realized that I was lost. I quickly ran to one of the trees and curled myself into a ball. What had happened to Justin? I sat there for a few minutes, and that was when I could hear rustling around me. Maybe it was more deer. Maybe it was a wolf. Worst case scenario, that thing we just saw was not some kind of collective hallucination, and whatever it was is coming after us. I sat there on the ground with my back pressed against the tree. That was when I heard a nauseating sound. Something was calling out into the woods. Something was calling out my Justin's name. The sound, whatever it was imitating me. Just like how I heard it call for help earlier. Whatever that thing was, it was calling out my husband's name with that damned distorted voice. Justin. He began to call out to him. Justin. That's when I heard a few branches snap as it made its way towards me. I held my breath, not wanting this thing to find me. I felt so sick to my stomach, and I was sure I was going to vomit right when we heard another voice call out. Michelle? Justin called out to me, or rather, the thing used my voice. I could hear a loud exhale and a deep groan as it must have shifted towards Justin's direction. I could hear its joints crack as it lifted itself and stepped onto the ground. That noise I heard last night. I looked over and I was looking at the same kind of long man beast. It tilted its head to the side, and I heard it call it again. Justin, help me. I heard Justin return its cry, and that was when I yelled at myself, Justin, it's using my fucking voice. I heard a loud crack as it turned its head towards me. Using its long jointed limbs, it pushed itself towards me, and I barely managed to avoid it as I ran towards the direction of Justin's voice. I swear for a moment, I saw my life flash before my eyes, but I felt a wave of relief when I saw Justin looking towards me with his gun pointed at the monster behind me. As soon as I ran past him, I heard the loud shot emerge from his weapon. With his handgun, he struck it 4 times. Then I heard him yell, shit, as he grabbed my arm and ran a bit ahead of me. I tried my best not to stumble and fall as he led me forward. I didn't want to turn around, but I could still hear whatever it was running behind us. We ran for what felt like an eternity, ever forward within this darkness. I began to feel a bit hopeless, as I couldn't make out a clearing ahead of us. It was our cabin, and better yet, a straight shot to our van. If we could rush to the van and get the hell out of here, that one thought was running through my head. We had to escape here. Then everything came crashing down as I felt my body being pulled down. Justin had stumbled, and he was falling down with me in tow. Our bodies slammed onto the earth, and I think I hit my head a bit. We started to shakily lift ourselves up until I turned around. That creature, that monster, attached to its thin arms, were thin, rake-like fingers. It began to reach out towards me. I ran towards Justin, and he tried his hardest to pull me up. I screamed and I sobbed as I felt the monster slide its nails onto my leg, deeply slicing into my skin. Justin took one arm and tried to pull me up with it as he emptied the rest of his bullets into the creature. It seemed like it was ineffective at first, until it let out an earth-shattering yell. It was so horrifying. Its open, razor-toothed mouth was wide open as it let out an almost human scream. I say almost human because it was as if multiple tones were coming out at once: male, female, young, and old. It was a scene of pure chaos, with all of us yelling, sobbing, blood everywhere. Justin was finally able to pull me up, but I could barely move my leg. I looked down to see that the gashes were so deep you could see my bone. I pushed through the pain, my whole body burning in agony, and we finally made it to our van. Or fucking van. I looked at the forest, and I could see its arms slowly emerging from the woods. Justin slammed his foot onto the pedal, and we peeled out of there. We thought I was going to bleed out. There was just so much blood, but thankfully we were able to make it to a nearby hospital. I barely made it. The police came shortly after we were all patched up, and we explained to them what had happened. We told them everything we could about the monster that was lurking in the forest. They weren't too sure if they believed us or not. They thought we were attacked by a bear or something, but my legs were torn to ribbons. The police and forest rangers said that they would scope out the area, but in the meantime, Justin wanted to go back to get our things that we had left. I begged him not to go, and the officers told him that they would be more than happy to get it for us, but he wanted to see for himself. I kinda understood. I still don't believe what happened to myself. A few hours passed by, and Justin returned to tell me he had gotten what was left of everything. He began to explain to me that when he and the officers made it to the cabin, the place was an absolute mess. The cabin's exterior was completely clawed up, and whatever it was made its way inside and tore everything apart. Everything was sliced up. I still have nightmares about that night, and Justin, he tries his best to try and forget it. We both physically recovered from what happened, but, needless to say, we won't be going out to the woods anytime soon. So tell me, what do you think it was? Because I have no fucking clue. My hometown has an urban legend, one that's been passed from generation to generation. No one knows exactly when the first story originated, but I can tell you exactly where it will take you. Among the whispers between the citizens of our little haven, there is a place that is spoken with equal parts fear and wonder. I'm speaking of a place just on the outskirts of our tiny rural town, nestled deep within the woods. An unassuming little bridge made of stone just 10 meters long that's over a little crevice filled with dry earth and dead leaves. A place that fills me with dread just recalling it. A place called Candlelight Bridge. My name's Nate, and when I was 16 years old, much like other teenagers, I was a giant ball of emotions. I didn't have a bad upbringing or anything. I just felt sad and angry all the time. I hated the town that I lived in, and I hated everyone in it. Well, not everyone. Jacob Price was a close friend of mine, ever since he and his dad moved to town when I was in the 5th grade. Jacob was pale as a sheet, with long scruffy red hair, and bright green eyes. We were in the same class, and found common ground in our obsession over Pokemon cards. We were inseparable as kids, and it stayed that way all the way up to high school. Just the two of us against the world. The fact alone made me so happy, and sad at the same time. You see, I found myself having feelings for Jacob when we started middle school. I've always wanted to tell him my feelings, but I was definitely afraid that he wouldn't share the same feelings. We never talked about girls or dating. When we talked, it was mostly about music and video games. Every chance we got together, when I had him over at my house, I wished I could have told him how I felt, but when the moment came, I would always chicken out. I wish I took my chance before we started our junior year, when he became more and more distant. Jacob's parents were always arguing, so we'd always come over and spend the night to avoid them. But near the end of our sophomore year, his mom had suddenly disappeared. Jacob didn't take it well, and when summer came, his dad forced him to stay home. When we started school in August, I saw him around the halls. I had missed him so much that I rushed over to him, but I was only met with surprise. The once radiant green eyes that I'd always stared into had turned sullen. His hair had grown unkempt. His face was gaunt, and he was a bit bandaged, with a fresh cut on his lip. Jacob, long time no see," I said carefully, as if each word was a step on a minefield. He raised a hand to respond to my greeting and cracked a smile. "Hey, what happened to you? I tried calling, but you never answered." His lips twitched a bit. "Oh, Dad just wanted me to hang out with him all summer, so we just hung out." Worry began to bubble up inside of me. He looked beaten, and he obviously hadn't eaten much. I wasn't good with words, so I didn't know what to say, but I knew in an instant that he was hurting. I just lifted my hand. I wanted to pull him in for a hug, but his eyes quickly darted to my palm, and he flinched. Jacob took a step back and raised the hood of his jacket over his head. "Hey, I'll catch you later, okay?" Jacob said as he turned and walked off. I stood there for a moment and used my outstretched hand to smack my forehead. Fucking idiots. We didn't have any classes together, but I would see him in the hallways. I tried to catch his attention, but his eyes were set to his next destination. This went on for days, then weeks, then months. We barely talked to each other. Even my parents started to get worried. So, one night they called his dad. I remember sitting in my room, pacing back and forth for what felt like an eternity. The image of Jacob's bruised face kept flashing in my head, and it drove me crazy. My parents never came to my room. They didn't come and update me about the call or anything. Morning came, and when I confronted them about it, my dad just looked at me and said, "Just give them some space for now." "What do you mean? My friend was obviously getting hurt and nobody was helping him. The boy I cared about was alone, and I was tired of sitting idly by as this continued. So, when I got to school, the first thing I did was look for him. I looked all over the school for him, but there was no trace. I waited for him after his first class, but apparently he never showed up to school. My plans had fell through, but it wasn't like I had much of a plan anyways. The whole day at school, I was lost in a haze, just thinking about where I went wrong and helping him. After the last bell had rung, I was making my way towards the bus home until I felt a hand grab my right shoulder. I turned around to see Jacob with his backpack and hoodie on. I wish I was happier to see him, but he looked so much worse than the last time I saw him. His face was riddled with new cuts and bruises. Jacob, dude, are you alright? You weren't in school today. What the Before I could finish my next question, he brought his face close to mine. Listen, I found out what happened to my mom, Jacob whispered. Wait, what do you mean? Here, come with me, he said. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew that I didn't want to leave him alone, so I followed him. Again, we lived in a small rural town, so I followed Jacob right from school directly towards the woods. He didn't have a map or anything, but his eyes were fixed to something ahead, as if he was being pulled by some invisible force. We were walking for hours, and night was slowly creeping. I was out of breath when I broke the silence. Where are we going, Jacob? My question didn't break his strides as he continued walking forward. Almost there. I'll explain then. I looked around, but I couldn't recognize anything familiar. There were only trees and shadows surrounding us. It was so dark that I just kept close behind Jacob. It was hard to see anything, and yet he was able to navigate us through the woods with ease. I couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of unease as we kept going forward through the darkness. I had noticed how silent the forest was. No sounds of animals, no rustling of leaves, nor a rush of breeze could be heard. The only thing I could hear was the sound of my labored breathing. We're here. Jacob spoke the words so softly and reverently. The two of us were finally in a small clearing. I looked to the left and right of us to see long stretches of barren earth on either side. I faced forward to see a spot that was eerily illuminated by the light of the moon, as if it was being presented to us by a natural spotlight. There was a small stone bridge. Each stone was a dark gray and worn with age. It looked like something you'd see in a fantasy movie. The edges of the bridge were adorned with white candles of all varying sizes, with melted wax fixing them to the surface. Jacob removed his backpack and crouched down to pull out a new white candle. He began to slowly walk towards the bridge, but stopped before placing his foot onto the stones. Jacob turned to look at me and lifted his hood. I winced when I saw dark purple bruises around his neck. Jacob, please tell me what's going on. It's obvious that your dad is hurting you. Let's go to the police or something. He took a deep breath before answering me. It's not going to help Nate. No one can stop him, and no one can help me. He looked towards the bridge. This is what can help me. What do you mean? I asked with trepidation. His lips turned into an unsettling grin. Come with me. Memories of us hanging out like we used to popped in my head. I didn't want to leave him alone, and I couldn't refuse him. Now with this feeling of dread burning in my chest, I followed close behind him, and we both stepped onto the bridge from the left side. Jacob made his way to the first candle and took out a small blue lighter that you'd find at a gas station. He ignited the flame of the lighter and touched it to the wick of the candle. The light of the candle didn't sway at all. It stood motionless, as if at attention. My body shadowed Jacob's as he continued to light each candle on the rail, one by one. After about 10 candles, he took another deep breath and spoke. This place is called Candlelight Bridge. You must have heard of it before. Of course, I heard of it, an old urban legend passed around the townspeople. My attention was fixed on the lighter in his hand, and I answered him with a nod. You see, the Candlelight Bridge is a mystery to the people here. A bridge in the middle of nowhere that leads to nowhere. But of course, that's wrong. All bridges lead somewhere, and all bridges connect to something. This bridge is special and needs a bit more to awaken it, Jacob explained. I wasn't understanding what he was saying. but before I could question him, he spoke again. It's a simple task. All you have to do is light each candle on the bridge, starting from one side all the way to the other. We need to light the path to call his attention. His attention? I asked. Who are you talking about? Jacob let out a small chuckle. The Troll Keeper. He's the one that presides over the bridge. He awakens when all the flames are lit, and he will take you. I was aware of the legend to an extent. I knew of the story of the Candlelight Bridge, and that it was a place where people died and disappeared. I hadn't heard anything like a Troll Keeper or some game with the candles. I decided I had heard enough, so I reached out to grab his shoulder. I began to shake him in hopes it would bring him back to reality. Back to me, and I shouted, "Jacob, please, come home with me. We can do something about your dad." "Stop," he shouted. "No one can help, and I have nowhere else to go." He quickened his pace, continuing to light the candles as he moved forward. I was a few steps behind him, and I followed suit. My stomach turned when I saw that he hadn't let go of the button of the light, and when he lit another candle, I could see that a section of his index finger was burnt black. I rushed over to pull the lighter out of his hand, but he pushed me away. I stumbled backwards and landed on my ass. I looked up at him to see a pained expression on his face. "Why? What's the point in all this?" I asked with teary eyes. He paused for a moment, then continued to light those damned candles and said, "Once you complete the task, once all the flames are lit, then at the end of the bridge, the Troll Keeper will take you home." He let out a weak laugh. "A place where I could be home, a place where my mom is waiting for me, a place where she wasn't getting hurt, a fucking place where I didn't get beaten every single day." My throat tightened as I held back from sobbing. I had no idea he was going through all that. I recalled each memory of him, and I wished that I had tried to help sooner. He was suddenly so far ahead of me, the dimly lit candles between us grew further apart. Jacob was already at the end of the bridge. He slowly walked towards the parallel end and continued to light the candles on that side. I picked myself up and stepped towards him, but when I faced him, I saw something. Just behind him was something dark on the stone floor of the bridge. I thought it was simply my eyes playing tricks on me at first, but no. The flames of the candles cast a dim light on the bridge, and something was moving. As if the shadow itself was crawling towards us. Towards Jacob. I attempted to grab the lighter away from him. As soon as I reached for it, my body suddenly flew backwards from him, like I was hit by a huge wave. I felt bones on my left arm snap as I landed, and I noticed that I was already at the opposite end of the bridge. I looked towards Jacob to see that behind him, the shadow grew. No, it was not just one shadow. Multiple amorphous blobs of darkness were moving from each candle, gathering behind him. Slow, small, wispy hands were gripping onto his arms, legs, and chest. They began to dig into him and even slowly tear away at him. Blood began to pour on each cut that was on him, but he barely flinched. Jacob continued his path towards my direction. The white of Jacob's eyes began to turn red. He was almost towards the goal, and he began to smile. I slowly tried to pick myself up, but I couldn't. The impact must have broken a leg too. The shadows behind him morphed into human shapes, and I could make out a pained expression on each one. Men and women of different ages, all of them writhing in agony, that soon shifted into a disgusting pleasure. Each of them began to whisper, "Take us, take us, take us." Some of the figures opened their mouths to reveal nothing but black voids, then closed them onto exposed parts of Jacob's flesh. He winced and let out a yell, but still continued. I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing, and I couldn't understand why he was doing all of this. Soon, he lit the last candle, and upon completion, he placed down his own candle at the end. The shadows behind him retreated a bit and stood a distance away, each of them crying and snarling towards us. Jacob lit the very last candle and looked towards me with tears in his eyes. Suddenly, I felt an immense pressure wash over me that I was shaking. I tried to lift myself up, but my back was slammed onto the floor. We were no longer alone. I looked up to see not just Jacob, but a tall man dressed in a black suit. The man's skin was pale white, and his eyes were so cartoonishly wide and black. He smiled a wide smile to reveal teeth covered in black tar, and he spoke. His voice was so sinister, and it hissed.
You completed the task. Now, where do you wish to go?
Jacob was in bad shape. He swayed back and forth, but firmly planted his feet to prevent from collapsing. I want a place to go home, a place where I don't have to be hurt. Jacob paused for a moment and collapsed onto his knees in front of me. He placed a hand on my cheek and said, I want a place where I can be accepted. My heart sank at the last sentence, and I started to cry. I wanted to tell him my feelings. I was so afraid that he wouldn't share what I had felt. The man hissed again.
Are you willing to pay the price?
Jacob's face turned to confusion. Jacob answered, I thought I paid the price. I lit the candles, and it spilled blood. The man's smile opened wide, and he released a disgusting chuckle.
No. I need something more, son.
Jacob slowly started to let go of his composed self and started to shake with fear. What more could you possibly want? Jacob said with fear filling his eyes. I felt something cold press against my face. The man's hand was gripped over my whole head, and its words came out like sizzling acid.
I need a life. I have to have a soul to take, and this boy here is perfect to seal the deal.
No, I can't do that to him, Jacob snapped. But the man didn't seem fazed at his response. As if he knew all along, a deep chuckle filled the night air, and it echoed all around us. He squeezed my head so tightly, I thought my skull was going to be crushed.
What a shame. But either way, I have a toll to collect either way.
The man lifted his massive hand away from my head, and Jacob quickly pulled me into his arms. Nate, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me, he sobbed. I wanted to tell him that things were okay. We could just leave this place and he could be with me. I wanted to tell him my feelings, and I wanted to tell him that we could have a home together. I heard his voice shake as he said, But before he could finish, Jacob was pulled away from me. The shadow people were pulling him away, each with a candle in hand. They took the unmoving flames, and they all pressed it against his body. Jacob began to burn. The smell of his flesh filled my nose, and it was nauseating. Jacob screamed, and I did too. I couldn't move at all. All I could do was watch as my love burned in front of me. As quickly as they appeared, the shadows dissipated, and a crumbling mound of what was once Jacob began to turn into ash in the wind. I was finally able to lift myself up, and the sun began to peek over the trees. The man's chuckle began to fill my ears, and I looked all around to see nothing. I was completely alone in the woods, completely broken. I looked over to the bridge to see that it was completely empty, except a mound of black ash staining the stone bridge. I passed out eventually. In my unconsciousness, I had a dream of Jacob, and that we were both happy. I had a dream that we were together with hand in hand. I wish that we had this happy ending, but this isn't one. I doubt one will ever come. I woke in a hospital, surrounded by police. I was found in the middle of the road, outside of town, and accused of the disappearance of Jacob Price. After a long recovery and an even longer investigation, there is nothing to be found. Now it's been 4 years, and it's getting close to the anniversary of when I lost him. I had a dream last night with him in it. He was just like those shadow people I saw that day. He was calling out to me, begging me to come take him home. Tonight's stories were Familiar Voices and A Place Called Home, both of them written by DarkHeroXX. If you enjoy these, chances are you'll enjoy the content that he creates. The links to his Reddit, as well as all of his other social medias, will be in the description below. Please check him out and let him know PA sent you. Hey, did you know I have merch? Well, I do. Crazy, right? And if you'd like to walk around representing my realm and gaining new travelers, the links to my merch store, as well as all of my other social medias, will be in the description below. As always, I'd like to say a special thank you to all my lovely Patreons. 242 Reads, Rando Calrissian, Seraphine the Midnight Bard, Creepy Clown Girl, Mia Mina, Hair Raising Narratives, Spooky Boo Scary Story Time, Lycan Trucker, and Pimp Demon. If you'd like to join these lovely travelers by light of my fire, you can do so by becoming a Patreon as well. Just remember, the support is always appreciated, but it's never expected. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and ding that bell if you're new, as it will really help push this video out into the algorithm and helps the channel grow. But as always, travelers, once you step into my realm, there's no stepping out.